Good evening, everyone. As we wait for our attendees to join, please just review our splash page and we'll be started shortly. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the Retail Design Institute New York chapter, thank you for joining us for our March event, Luxury Retail Today. I am Andrew Lee, Senior Project Manager, Architecture and Planning at Equinox and Chapter President. Diana Revkin, Studio Director at TPG Architecture and Chapter Vice President, joins me tonight as we moderate a discussion following the presentations from our guests. The chapter is very pleased to offer our members and members of the public continued online content during this period to highlight excellence in retail design. And we want to thank all the members of the New York chapter board who have helped put this together, these excellent events as well.
Okay. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the evening. Our event sponsor is Karen Pierce Global Direct. And our chapter sponsors are Planet Construction, Chimenti Construction, and Style Mark. Big thanks for all of them.
Yes, we could really not do any of these programs without their support, so thank you. Tonight we are joined by three guests to talk about their experiences and their professional experience in luxury retail. Our first guest tonight is Elaine Graciano, Chapter Board Member and Director of Store Planning and Construction Americas at Salvatore Ferragamo. Elaine's entire career has been in retail and almost exclusively luxury retail, including LV, Jimmy Choo, Tory Burch, Richemont, and currently Ferragamo. She started with concept design and moved through to architecture and switched to the owner side. So Elaine, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, let's see if I can get this there. Okay. Can you all see the screen, hopefully? Okay, so you architects don't know retail. How many stores have won design awards that are closed? Well, that's a thought-provoking question. Joe Weishar was my first boss. So first job, and being asked this question, I felt like I spent a lot of money on my education. So I do hope that architects knew something about retail. But like the person at the bottom of this ladder looking up, I had quite a long way to go in finding what makes a successful retail design. So on the owner side, you were at essentially the center of the entire creative process. So you are at the beginning, you are involved with all of the design concepts that come along, the development through the execution and planning of it, all the way through the construction and execution. So you really get the full experience in terms of the overall process. So how do we create these remarkable environments? Brand image. So it's about statement and position. You know, in luxury retail, I think we go through incredible lengths to come up with certain designs, unique experiences that no one else has really done. In this particular example, when I was at LV, for Bloomingdale's San Francisco, this particular LED storefront had not been in the United States previously, and had to figure out how to make this happen here in the States. So having to travel to Hong Kong with the team that has done this only once before to find out how we can make this happen here in the States. When I think about the amount of how far we will go to make sure that it is just the right kind of approach. Just as you can see here, this white storefront actually took 3 days working with the LED designer to find the perfect shade of white. So you'd have the LED designer program and come up with a particular shade. You look at it, it's too blue. Start to program again, look at it again, it's too green, and on for 3 days. So the amount of kind of great lengths that things are that we will go to make sure that we are offering a one-of-a-kind unique experience is part of sort of the expectation of what people have when it comes to luxury retail. This also happens to be sort of the beginning relationship of Bloomingdale's and LV. So this is a nice way for the brand to show a commitment to Bloomingdale's as far as a partnership. And brand identity. So how do we expose customers to who we are as a brand? Tory Burch in this Georgetown location happens to be very close to where her family is located. And she wanted to offer literally her home to the public. So what you see here, images here, are very much like her home in New York, part of her salon. So you have the opportunity to sit on her mohair sofa, walk on her $80,000 area rug, view the gold leaf ceiling that you have in the oak room. So it's a, how do you affiliate yourselves and really delve into who that brand is, who she is for that particular brand. Now, what about form? So at Richemont, we have a multi-brand location that is in Yorkdale Mall in Toronto. On the outside is a collection of 4 smaller watch and jewelry brands, but it's actually one space. So from the customer side, it looks like 4 individual boutiques, but it is only one space with a shared stock room, back house operations and functions. So we have essentially a roommate situation. I think this is, from a business perspective, this is a way that I think we can all relate in how we have roommates here in New York City that makes it much more easy to sort of get into certain markets that we want to be in. I think what you can see here very closely is some of these sliding doors that we have that separate the different brands. So they can be open and customers can flow in between the brands, or they can be closed to show a certain individual. To go from selling multiple brands to actually no selling. So here we have a virtual reality pop-up that was done for about a month at Hudson Yards a couple of years ago. So another experience that we can offer to the customers where you can try on virtually some of the product, or really go into their world and experience and be transported to who that brand is and what their craftsmanship was all about. As part of COVID last year, we had to offer a couple of temporary outlets in order to respond to a very real business issue that was happening, in which there were no longer any of the main stores that were open, but we still had to essentially liquidate a lot of the excess inventory that was coming. So here we have some temporary outlets that were just very quick to market, short time frame, just to be able to alleviate and distribute some of the surplus of inventory. Last but not least is the proliferation of more and more retail pop-ups that we have post-COVID. Here in Miami Design District, it's another situation where you would have a very short-term lease, and it is more of an integration of visual merchandising and store design. So it is very much an integration of those two worlds and offering up a very limited edition of products and a very event atmosphere. So this is what we are doing now. Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elaine. That was really fantastic. Our next guest will be Carla Wells, chapter board member and senior project manager, store planning and development at Louis Vuitton. Carla is responsible for managing full store construction, concept to completion with the global architectural team, and she explores strategies for procuring specialty items and innovative building methods for pop-up store locations. Carla, welcome.
Thank you so much. Let's get the screen share going. Can you see? Good? Great. So as Andrew mentioned, my background is pretty much in pop-up design, but I think in order for me to get there, a lot of what had to happen was understanding the brand of LV. And so I've been here for 6 years and I've come to a really great appreciation for what the brand does as far as retail design and architecture. And one of the ways in which I can move between the world of a full built store and the pop-ups is really understanding where the brand comes from. And I think what's interesting is they really do explore a lot of integration with architecture and music and art into the world of retail. So some of the runway shows take place in these incredible places like the Louvre, I Am Pace, Museum in Kyoto, Oscar Niemeyer in Brazil. You know, there's so many connections. They have a museum built by Frank Gehry. So I think some of the parts of luxury retail do come from a deeper understanding in all the ways in which art could be expressed. So I think what I've been able to develop and find are some of those intersections, as well as how they are connecting to the user. So knowing that, you want to draw people in, it still needs to be an elevated experience, and kind of diversifying what that experience could be. We have a store in Soho that I am responsible for rotating. So every quarter it comes with a new theme that's connected to a collection or a new capsule, anything that also might pull in a different user. In the bottom left, there's a Nigo capsule that was men's, and it was part of the collection, but a period between in which they're almost relaunching or reintroducing new pieces into that collection. So knowing that these capsules come along, it's a great way to help animate the space. On the bottom right, that's actually the same space animated for women's recent collaboration with Dreamy that's open with Urs Fisher, and that's open now. On the upper right was an exhibit space, almost gallery on the ground floor, retail on the second level, which is usually like, if you don't walk into retail, you don't think people are going to buy anything. But I think with the flow of that space and it being very Instagrammable and, a space that you kind of wanted to occupy for some time, it was a nice way to kind of pace the shopping experience for each of the users. And then the middle at the top, there is a project that just launched a couple months ago in Vogue. And this is actually one of the solutions to dealing with retail in the COVID world, which is, getting that departure from clients being in store, all the shopping happening online, but also at the same time wanting to make that connection with each of the clients. So it was a project in which we designed a trailer that could bring the store to each client. That is a castle, not a home, just FYI. Another part is actually digesting what's happening in the runway shows and then translating that into a pop-up space. So this was a collection actually built faux staging to be the corner of Rivington. And so we actually found a vacant space on that exact same corner and then flipped that into the retail space. The creative director even took some time to challenge the people who follow him on Instagram or in any other kind of social sphere to then make their own content with his product in the background and like turn it into a competition. So while people were constantly there taking photos, it actually was a great way to activate the space and have people interact with the product different ways. A project that I just completed in December, this was another almost literal translation from a runway show to an actual built environment. Another solution to COVID, it being outside, allowed people to circulate at a socially responsible distance. And also at a time where a lot of the retail stores were closed, this could remain open. So, this huge mural wall that was inspired by the close, it was actually taking place in two different spheres where it was almost like a mobile runway show. So it actually showed twice. And then the idea was that it actually traveled to Miami and eventually ended up in LA. And there's footage and variation and trying to get people involved and interacting with kind of this different way to experience retail. So I think a lot of that really stems from, the different ways that you can express it. It could be mobile, it could be a museum, it could be a full experience. And so I think that has been a really interesting way to kind of watch it transform from your traditional space. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Carla. That was really wonderful to see. And our third guest tonight is Holland, Operations Director at Mace. Ollie is the head of retail for Mace North America, a global construction consultancy providing owners, representative project and cost management services in a broad spectrum of construction sectors. The company's retail team consists of over 50 plus project managers based across North America, working closely with brands such as Tiffany & Co., Cartier, Apple, Gucci, and Dyson. Ollie is also heading up the current Tiffany & Co.'s global flagship transformation on Fifth Avenue. So welcome, Ollie. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Let me just pull up my deck. Okay, yeah, so thanks for having me. This is actually my first RDI event, so great to be here. And as you're about to find out, I'm neither an architect or designer, so please be kind with the questions later. But essentially, yeah, Ollie Holland, head up the retail portion of our business in North America. Original background is civil and structural engineering, then did 3 to 4 years of general contracting in the UK, really working on sort of out the ground core and shell projects on a large scale. Came to America 8 years ago, and for some reason someone thought it was a good idea to put a core and shell PM on a luxury retail job with Burberry in Miami. And really the rest is history from there. Been hooked on the retail delivery side, and it's really been a great opportunity to literally go across America with some great brands that you can see below. I think the main driver in my career in North America has definitely be with Tiffany & Company, who I'll touch on the big project later. But you know, as Andrew said, we've got a great team in North America, more than 50 project managers and cost managers, all acting as owners reps, working with great brands. In terms of our overall business, we're a 6,500 person global construction consultancy. North America, we're pushing 250 people now. Retail is a huge portion of our business. So in terms of what's been sort of consuming my life in the past few years, been really fortunate to act as project director on the flagship transformation of Tiffany's global flagship for retail on 57th and 5th. Brilliant project, and obviously iconic for the brand and for New York City. A 10-floor existing retail and office that's being fully transformed over the past year and going on into the next 2 years. Working with a great team on this project. The design architect for the core and shell element are OMA, architect of record, Callison. I know there's a few people on here from CRTKL. We're acting as the PM and costs, and we've got Structuretone as a contractor and WSP acting as MEP and structural. But really the whole concept behind the project was transforming this existing structure, this iconic footprint, and bringing it into the next generation of use for the building. And really the first portion of this project was a huge core and shell element. So the existing top 4 floors of this building is the first thing that we basically took off, and you can see we're in the process currently of rebuilding what we're calling the upper volume. This upper volume is clad with slump glass coming out of Sealy in Germany, and really this space will act as more of an events and experience element of the project. The other part of the core and shell was we've completely blown out the elevator, extended it right the way through the building. So vertical circulation and how you pull people off the ground floor is a real priority for Tiffany. Other element that you can just about see on the left-hand image, the arched project. Obviously, we're decanting about 400 employees who work in this building and setting up a temporary retail space for this building. So we actually took over the old Nike Town, which is right next door, made it into a quasi pop-ups, temporary flagship essentially. So big portion of the project that we did prior to this. In terms of history, it's an awesome building, built in 1940 for the princely sum of $1 million, which seems very good value for nowadays. But as the buildings evolve through its life cycle, and you can see in the middle image, Trump Tower is the next door neighbor, and as part of the agreement of Trump building his tower, Tiffany sold some air rights, and they were allowed to build this 4 floors that I referenced that we ultimately demolished and are rebuilding now. But really, it's an awesome building for history. For the technical nerds like myself, it was one of the first commercial spaces in New York to actually have central air conditioning. And as we demolished that upper volume, those air handling units that you can see there that are 80 plus years old, still working perfectly, but great portion of history. For those who may have seen on social media, we also had our innovation moment. We lifted a mobile crane up on top of the roof to help with the upper volume overbuild. And really this is pushed out of 2 problems for the project. Firstly, you've got the Fifth Avenue moratorium. So every November through January, you're essentially limited on external construction and lane closures. And really that was a major issue for us because that portion of the year was when we were meant to be building the upper volume. So essentially we worked with our partners and we came up with a scheme that's been used 3 times before that utilizes a mobile crane to build the upper volume, and really that saved 2 months off our schedule. So awesome to be a part of that. So that gives you a flavor of some of the big sort of complex projects that we do. But like I said, we've been on a long journey in North America with our business, with our retail clients. And part of the agenda that we're pushing for the future of luxury is really how do we break down the silos between design and cost. The traditional design methodology was really based on what we would call intuition. Designers understanding the brand, understanding the architecture, they lay it out, give us a set of drawings, we invariably give them an estimate. It's a back and forth VE, highly inefficient process. So where we're going as a business is really providing clients and the designer the data to avoid that whole inefficiency. That data-driven process where we take the cost that we capture through the life cycle of the project, and we work in tandem with the design team to help them lay out the case line, the product display, has really been a benefit to a lot of our clients. And really where we're trying to take the top clients that we work with now is how do we become an insight-driven business? So not only using the data that they're collating internally within their own projects, but giving a snapshot of what the competition are doing. And this drive to sort of insight-driven business, sort of represented on the left-hand side. When you start adding in the cost data into the design process, and as the architects and designers are laying out their case line, their wall units, which will sell product, not only can we give you the unit cost of how much that fixture actually costs, but when you start adding in the revenue per annum for each one of those elements in the project, really helps clients build their overall operational model for what their stores should be achieving. And as I said, when you start taking that element, understanding their brand and replicating it and giving insight into the competition, even completely different brands of retail, really helps the design process and looking forward to the stores of the future. And yeah, from our point of view, you can't talk about the new store concept or store of the future without referencing client experience or customer experience centers. We sort of had this first wave from our point of view with Cadillac House. I think was our first project down in Soho, where it was a retail experience that wasn't focusing on the sell to the customers. Online sales are doing huge amounts of businesses proportions nowadays. So really the real estate footprint needs to focus on how do you make the customer come in, identify with the brand, have a great experience. And also it gives the brands a better opportunity to really represent their core values. So we're working with a lot of clients nowadays on things like sustainability, which, most of our clients now are on net carbon zero journeys. How do you build a physical footprint for the brands that represents that goal? Equally brand responsibility and diversity for supply chain, all elements that are super important. And hopefully if you get those two elements right, you create a nice moment for your customers to come in and feel part of the brand. And like Carla said earlier, even better if they share it on Instagram 1 million times. So really that's my pitch. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you, Holly. I think we can take this opportunity to welcome back our other guests, Elaine and Carla, as we go into the Q&A. So for all our attendees, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens to enter any questions that you may have that you want to put forth to our group of guests. Actually, one of the first questions that came up through that Q&A function was really related to the duration of pop-up and temporary stores, and I think each of our panelists did touch upon temporary spaces, whether it was temporary flagship store or temporary outlet stores and the pop-up experience. Perhaps we can go into how those installations and the life of those installations kind of fall into the overall thought plan of the portfolio of stores.
I think it would also be good to hear a little bit about the lessons learned from those temporary spaces and what you see that's going to carry forward into the future beyond COVID.
I'll start. I more so build the pop-ups just as soon as I know about them. I don't think we get a lot of time really to do like a full design, development set, construction documents. Sometimes I'm literally sketching up a plan by hand and giving it to the GC on site, like, oh, that won't work this way. What about like this? So I think the duration of the planning is almost just as long. They can be anywhere from a year to a month. I've done them for a week. I think it just depends on like the sphere in which each of these spaces are being installed. As opposed to be like, you had to be there? Is it like, no, we're testing a new location? Is it like, oh no, this is for COVID because, you know, 50% of the stores that's their occupancy. So like, what do we do the other 50% of people who actually want to come shop the space, and how long is this going to last? Like, we don't know. So I think it really depends on the conditions. I think it also depends if there's like a collection or specific launch that has anything to do with it. That's like, oh, this will be stale after 6 to 8 weeks. We're going to flip it. We're going to do something different, at least from my experience. So.
Carla, are the visual merchandising teams a big part of that effort? Because so much of it overlaps with the visual world in terms of the nature of, you know, it's almost like a launch. It's like launching a collection. It's like a seasonal promotion.
I think there's a very clear line as to like, this is all collection based, and then this is all the things we have to do to get the store to open. So I think because it is a merging of like, it could be a glorified show window, but because it has to have like asset protection, like data run and different cameras and different lighting and screens and different materials and different fixtures, I think that's when it starts to evolve into the world of store planning. I think a lot of the props and the animation portions are very much integral to what VM does, because those are pieces they would typically use in their day-to-day, which is kind of restricted to a show window or a pop-in space versus an entire building that could be evolving into a store. If that makes sense.
It does. Elaine, what about you?
Well, I think on the most part, our temporary location pop-ups, they can be very, very short, from a month to as long as perhaps a year, right? But the planning also, like Carla has mentioned, reiterate that, yes, the planning also depends. You could have a very long time and have the luxury of having a long time to plan that, but more often than not, it's a very, very short, finite time to get everything done. And so, yes, there is more of a merging that happens between the visual merchandising teams as well as with the store planning team. You know, I think what I find with store planning and having to deal more with the architecture, you kind of are sort of like a little bit of the Debbie Downer, like, oh, you know what, that idea sounds great, but there's a fire code that really can't do it here. So there's a little bit of that, and how do we get around that? Because we have a very limited time. Permit timeframes to get an actual permit is very long, and so that also wreaks havoc on our schedules as well. You know.
Great, and Ollie, you know, when you were doing when Tiffany wanted to do that temporary store next door, were they looking to replicate all the various departments that were included in the flagship store originally, and place that into the temporary store, or did they prioritize spaces to kind of showcase while the flagship store was under renovation?
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting thing for me about the temp store next door is a prime example where I don't think the brand wanted to try and replicate the existing flagship. The temp store was a chance for them to sort of be a lot more fun with their interior design. If you walk in the temp store in Nike, it's a big brash sort of experience, and I think it gives the brand an opportunity to say we're stepping outside of our normal brand design, making an impact with the public for a short period of time, and then revert back. Another aspect that we really focused on was reuse of materials or case line from other projects and repurposing that for those temp projects. You're always up against the clock when it comes to temp stores, so any way that we can shave some time or keep the budget in check is awesome.
Great. And do you guys see these kind of pop-up spaces or temporary stores being something that luxury brands will continue to invest in the future, or has there been a shift in that kind of thinking? Because it seems like pop-up stores several years ago were the new rage, and it still seems to be going very, very strong.
I think from how we're seeing the market, pop-up stores and temp stores are being used to avoid, the dreaded live store remodel, which was the old sort of vogue of trying to keep the store open and renovate in place. So yes, hopefully the temp stores stick around. That would be a lot easier. But like I said, I think it's a great brand opportunity.
I agree. I think that the overall time frame of how it's handled, from a real estate standpoint, no one really wants to commit to a very long period of time in being there. I think the speed at which everything moves is so much faster. And so we have to be able to turn around a different experience very often, actually. So it doesn't mean that the business model, can stay the way it was. I think one of the problems that I had experienced last year during COVID and having to do a lot of these new locations also was just even the supply chain, because you didn't have the same kind of supply chain and relationships. Things were, you had shutdowns in different parts of the world that you relied on, and it really became something where you had to change the way that you were doing your whole process to make this thing happen.
And Carla, the spaces that you have created are so unique. Has it kind of taken that shift of stores being that capital improvement and, to kind of, move product to a more of a marketing exercise, which you mentioned social media being a very strong player, and then creating more of a brand experience and a connection with the brand? How do those two kind of, potentially weigh up against each other?
I think that there's kind of value on both sides, because for a pop-up or a launch or a collection, that's a way just to kind of activate the stores. So I think there's been the conversation very much around what Oliver said about, typically these stores renovate every 7 to 10 years, but if we can do a pop-up here and there and kind of stretch it out, maybe, or do major minor works to refresh it and make it look as though it's a new thing, but not commit to a full renovation and closing and moving into a temp store for construction and then moving back. I think that there's a little bit of both. I also think that these animations, while they can be in freestanding spaces, a lot of them are moving into department stores. So it might be a pop-up in Saks. So there's not as much building, but you still have to do these series of different fixturing, different finishes to kind of differentiate yourself from the floors. And then I think there's ones that the time I think depends, if it's a week or a year, or you're testing a new location. I did a pop-up that was supposed to be up for 2 months in Brookfield, and it was open for 3 years, and now it is the Brookfield store. So I think the transition, those phases we're just gonna go for a couple months and test it out, to no, we're gonna go and then we're gonna close the store, we're gonna open a permanent location, are just two very different worlds. I think that, it helps say the business is here, the people are down here shopping. This client maybe doesn't want to go all the way to Fifth Avenue every time they want to come to the store, even to Soho. So I think it also depends on different developments that are happening throughout the city and where it makes sense to be. I've actually been into the same space twice, which I didn't think would happen. I was in an exhibit space in the summer of 2019, and then we just turned it into a pop-up space in January of 2021. So it was great because I was oh, I know this building. I know the GC, we know the conditions because we were the last ones in here. So I think stuff like that, where you can kind of capitalize on adaptive reuse, reusing a space, reusing the fixtures, also does aid to the longevity of that business model, because it's easy. You only use something for 8 weeks versus the store, you use it for 7 years. It's well, how do you build so that maybe we can use these things a little bit faster and create them quicker, but keep them for longer and use them for more activations. So I think it's a little bit of both worlds.
I think that also speaks to the whole issue of brands not being able to project beyond, a year or so, because no one really knows or can ascertain where the markets are going to be in 2 years. So there's that need to be flexible to really move quickly. And yeah, that kind of speaks to Marco's question about where was Marco's question about where luxury brands investing right now, or where are they investing in the future, where the next big moves. I don't know if anyone knows that.
That's a tough one, I'd have to say. I mean, because it is something that's always being looked at, and it's something that's looked at for us in different channels, not just what a location is, but what is our distribution within a particular market, and is it the right answer, right? Is it enough to have, so let's say, I don't know, 2 boutiques within one particular market, or is it more of an appropriate approach to have 1 boutique and perhaps 1 shop-in-shop within a department store? Because both are answering to different clientele, different need.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is something that is constantly being looked at and reassessed. And right now, especially in a post-COVID world, that makes it even more of a bigger question.
Yeah. Hesitancy to commit.
Ooh, commit.
Oliver, you know, obviously you talk with many brands and work with many brands. Are you seeing sort of an inability to project forward beyond a certain point in time that used to be a little bit easier?
Yeah, I think obviously COVID has thrown a wrench in everyone's plans for the store planning life cycle. I think the immediate recognition is the Asia market is particularly the focus, with a restriction in travel, and particularly with the luxury brands as well. They're really focusing on the immediate 1 to 2 year in the Asia markets. What we are seeing though are certain brands are really taking an aggressive look at North America, with the amount of real estate that's suddenly becoming open. With people, there's 30% vacancy on flagships on Fifth Ave right now, right? So some brands are really going aggressive at it in North America. So you kind of got that balance that's going on, and it's really understanding who's doing what.
Any surprises in that regard? Like brands you weren't even familiar with suddenly talking about doing something big in New York or other major cities?
Yeah, certain large sports brands. That's probably all I can say. But less so the luxury in North America, but some of the ones who have really benefited from the COVID market, people working out from home, wearing more sports stuff, are really planning some big things across North America. So it's interesting to see.
Interesting.
And I guess also through COVID and the tick up on e-commerce, are you seeing, Ollie, any emerging trends from e-commerce first brands that are investing in brick and mortar?
It's a tough one. I think the luxury markets always will lend themselves to people want to go into a store and get the experience. You don't want to buy a Tiffany ring online. If you're going to spend that money, you want to go in. You want the champagne glass. So I'm not really seeing it personally. I don't know what anyone else thinks, but yeah, not personally.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. The experience of space is so important, and that connection with the brand as well.
Ollie, I'm going to direct this to you. A question about sort of more the execution end of what we're talking about. Have permit timelines changed during COVID, and is it taking longer to get a permit? And is it different for pop-up stores?
All depends in what city you're working in, obviously. New York has been weird because there was an initial backlog as the whole city shut down due to the COVID May period. Really not really seeing much difference in New York essentially, but really when you go to the West Coast, I think that's where we're seeing it worse than the East Coast, strangely.
Interesting.
And then Carla, I guess with those pop-up spaces that you've built during this period, you know, what have you thought in terms of like supply chain, material selection, both from a cost standpoint and also from a, you know, a hygiene perspective?
I think what's been interesting is that, you know, we're used to sometimes we're importing fixtures from Asia, sometimes they're made locally. So knowing what project is coming from where, that has definitely affected the schedule. Ordering furniture from overseas, the backups at the ports, the COVID shutdown at the ports, being able to get a generator. Those things have all been like being able to get plexiglass, which used to be like a non-issue, same with plywood. Now it's everywhere because there were all the barricades for a while. Then everyone was like, oh, we need to have office dividers and dividers at every intersection between people. So what I would like, oh, I'm just gonna make this plexi podium. It's like, oh no, that you can't get it because it's just not available for like 4 to 6 weeks. I'm like, that's how long it should take to make this thing. Like I can't even get the materials to start. So I think that's the beauty of having like reusable fixtures, because you just whip those out to replace whatever you thought you were going to buy. And then I think for the permitting process, most of the pop-ups try to avoid permits because they're moving so fast and there's so many things. Like if you had a drawing that was actually accurate on the day of opening, like I'm continually surprised. Just did a very rigorous permit process in Beverly Hills, but it was like texting the city, like, hi, are you there? Are you there? Can you answer? Because we don't have time to kind of like sit and wait for the regular like 3-4 week review, kind of like 3 or 4 days. So I think being able to push those things through, especially if there's a sense of urgency in making a deadline or a launch date or opening, it seems like there's been some flexibility, but it's almost like what they're requiring and being more flexible is more intense. So a lot of the time they're like, okay, well, you can do these things and we can get you open, but like these COVID things, like you have to have the table with the hand sanitizer, you have to be socially distanced, you have to show the grid on the floor plan, some of those little extra steps that are gonna help with like actually getting the inspections and buildings and final done. So I think it's been a complicated path because you're then designing in the COVID stuff. Whereas before you had stores, you're like, oh, we're just gonna put the socially distanced stickers so like people know kind of where to be. Now it's like to submit and start a project with that perspective. It's just a little bit of a different dynamic.
Yeah, and I think one of the images that you showed was actually almost like a park of shipping containers in an outdoor environment. One of our attendees was curious, you know, how did you deal with security in such a open space, and you know?
Well, there was 24/7 security there because while Jungle Plaza is on the backside of Design District, there's all like kind of the main thoroughfares, and there's like kind of what was going to be developed, but ended up being kind of an area where they would have like exhibitions. I think they've hosted like some of the art fairs there. They've hosted a car show. So that was kind of like this lot that was kind of like flex space for them. So going into that, there was some cameras that oversee from, there's a parking garage across the street. There's 2 major Piaget's there and Van Cleef is there. So like they have pretty intense camera system. And then I was more worried about the containers getting tagged, like not even really anything being taken because the containers are steel and like they lock and they're like super, so you'd have to come in there like getting ready to weld off anything to get inside. I was more concerned about someone jumping the fence, tagging it and leaving, something absurd. Luckily that didn't happen because we had the security. So I think there was kind of a big AP push to be like, we want cameras, we want safes, we want this thing wired and we want it locked down. I'm like, the fence is only 3 feet. I've jumped it. So, I work here. So I think it was a very different dynamic of what they were expecting of, you know, the safety of the area. The beauty is that it was kind of dead at night because Design District shuts down around like 7. There's a restaurant across the street. So it wasn't like a highly trafficked area either. Most people didn't even know it was back there until they like drove around the block. They would try to find it and couldn't. So yeah, we made it though. So that's all I can be happy about.
And was vandalism kind of like a lessons learned from the Rivington store? I recall hearing
so many tags. I think that's kind of, that was the last pop-up kind of that we had done because the year turned and COVID happened. So it was like December. And that was a little bit of PTSD because people were like, oh God, the amount of times we clean the graffiti off, like the amount of times like, but it was like a dare. It was like a challenge. It was like how to engage the user. Just like, well, we can't have the graffitis on the store. And I was like, we are in the Lower East Side. In theory, we could just leave it there because it'll feel like more natural in its environment. It's like, well, is that the brand identity or is it like just the neighborhood? So I think it was a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And, you know, definitely the idea of luxury and what luxury is and how it is perceived continues to evolve. And I think, you know, Baptiste asked, you know, when entering a retail store today, what trigger points in a store, you know, explain to the visitor that this is luxury? What kind of emerging ideas are you guys looking at or thinking about, or paring back or elevating or, you know, expanding upon?
I guess it just depends on what the core values are. So how, you know, how do you communicate that in the store environment of what that brand is, right? So yes, we create the physical space, the store environment, but the reality is that the clientele expects a lot more out of a luxury space than they would an off-price store, let's say. You know, so the attention to all of that detail, the layering of all the different finishes that need to happen, that create that sort of tactile environment that really adds to a whole comprehensive type of feel and an ambiance that really is something that the clients are anticipating that they will experience as part of an enhancement to the product, right?
And it's also, isn't it also beyond the product? It's the service, the level of service, what the associates do on behalf of their clients and customers, their guests, if you will, to make them feel that it's a very special destination.
Absolutely. I think it's how do you reach the customer as an individual? So it's having to start a relationship with them. And certainly there's more to that experience. So as you say, there's the selling ceremony and all of the trappings, the champagne, this seating on, you know, this $10,000 chair that's gold laden, whatever it might be. But that's all part of the overall experience. And that's sort of like what's becoming the base standard, let's say, for retail, luxury retailing.
Related to service, have service models changed? Like, you know, curbside pickup obviously was sort of an offshoot of COVID. Do you see any changes in the service model that will need to be translated into the built environment by all of the designers and architects who are listening this evening? Carla, what do you think about that? The service model and how?
I mean, I think it's kind of interesting to consider like the curbside pickup. When I started hearing that, I was like, I don't know if that's luxurious because it sounds like Chili's. And, you know, I was like, you know, can it be called something else? Because again, I think you're like, how do you sell up the fact that like, yeah, we're going to bring it, like it's a drive-through essentially. Like now that's what we've dumbed down retail experience to. Like we're used to come in and get your champagne and your macaroons and one-on-one client experience. Like, no, here's your stuff in a bag and like you just go. I was also of the kind of trying to understand like why wouldn't they just order it and have it brought to their house and they don't even have to leave because of just the times. So I think it was kind of interesting to kind of watch that emerge and like how do we make it look nice? Like what is that elevated? Like is it like valet? Is it, you know, what is that ceremony that happens? It's an exchange of a bag to a car to a person that I don't really know that much about, just so they could get the product out the shipping and handling. Like, yes, you have the option to come pick it up. So I think that is still an elevated service, I think, because, you know, that's the part you're not waiting on the UPS guy to deliver it. Like you can go, you can get it today. We can ship it to your local store, so you can actually kind of, you know, convert that person, and maybe they will come back when the store's open, or maybe they will actually like, oh, that woman was so nice to me at the car for 2 minutes. I'd like to shop with her again. So I think it really depends on like if there's a unique experience. I think the selling ceremony is different, and especially I think I've seen a lot of like virtual appointments, like in the stores. I've seen like people just following who unpack things on the internet. They just unbox it and they show it to you, and then they put it back in the box, and you can decide if you're going to buy it or if that's something you want to contact them about. So I just think that there's a lot of like, how do you bring the client experience to the client outside of the store? And I just think it's an interesting dynamic to consider.
And setting aside COVID, because obviously we are making progress in that direction, related to business model and the trend toward hospitality in retail, and trying to find other ways of engaging with the clients to create a more full brand experience. Are you continuing to see trends within the store design concept that include, you know, whether it's a cafe or some sort of, you know, maybe even beauty services that are incorporated to kind of create more of a full brand experience that goes beyond just product?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at most of the luxury brands now, they're pushing the in-store restaurants, the bars, the literally branded, you know, the Ralph Lauren restaurant or the Tiffany Blue Box Cafe. So like I said, the experience element is becoming a real priority for these brands. And, you know, you can associate luxury products with luxury fine dining or luxury, you know, sort of members club environments. And it's something that we're seeing a lot.
So you're also then having to face issues more frequently, probably with health department approvals and liquor licenses.
Liquor licenses, yeah. Everyone's
That's a big one.
That go into getting those spaces open and functioning.
Yeah, absolutely. It also sort of broadens the spectrum that you're working on in projects, from going from your typical retail to learning what a liquor license is and how long it takes. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
And I guess I think we have time for one more thought line, and I think I'll give you a tough one. Over the past few years, we have really seen a shift in consumer behavior, consumer relationships with brands, and how social issues, causes are very, very important to these brands. And Ollie, you had mentioned brands are aspiring to this concept of net zero, and I think as we leave this kind of COVID experience, and sustainability really becomes more important to a lot of people. What are brands doing about sustainability? How important is it in terms of their build outs to address that portion of sustainability, not just from the product and the service point, but the build out of their stores too?
Yeah, I mean, so even the Tiffany flagship, that's aspiring to be a LEED Gold. So something that you wouldn't necessarily think a luxury jewelry store would ever get to with the types of materials, but really you can get the majority of your points by not even touching the finishes. So brands, obviously are looking for the plaque on the wall with the LEED accreditation. Well, is becoming a big portion of priorities with projects. The most interesting stuff that we're working with a couple of clients is really how they change their materiality. We're looking at things like engineered wood structures, like the glue lamp concept, to replace very carbon intensive materials with things that are sustainable. So it's a big goal for luxury brands, because the typical palette is marble, nice bright lights. So it's definitely going to be a challenge, but great to see them tackling it head on.
Yeah, I think also like renovating an existing store is probably one of the most sustainable things that any brand could do. You know, reuse an existing structure and take it to the next chapter. So very excited to see how that continues to develop. And I think, you know, I think that's time for us, but I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you to our three guests, Elaine, Carla, and Ollie, in chatting about what luxury retail is today. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.